After the excitement of the Columbian Exposition, Henry decided that he needed a vacation. Early in 1894, he went to Europe, Egypt, and the Middle East. Henry, who was nearly 50, traveled with 2 of his children and a niece. Sally, who had not been feeling well, stayed home. Henry played tourist among the famous pyramids of Egypt, and he bought souvenirs to send home, but he couldn't seem to stay away from work. In Germany, he took orders from a new customer. And when he returned to Pittsburgh, Henry threw himself right back into his work. He set out on a U.S. tour of his factories and rural salting stations. The end of 1894, however, brought great sadness to the Heinz family. Henry's wife, Sally, was still sick. Her temperature rose and she developed pneumonia, a lung disease. Henry prayed for Sally's recovery, but on Thanksgiving night, she died. The day of her funeral, Henry wrote, was the darkest day we ever knew. To take his mind off his sorrows, Henry focused on the company. The company was once again going through hard economic times as it had during the 1870s. But by this time, Henry was one of the country's wealthiest people. The HJ Heinz Company increased its profits every year as new plants equipped with machines helped cut the costs of producing Heinz brand foods. Henry also continuously added new products such as canned baked beans and soups. During the last few years of the 1890s, Henry repeatedly showed his genius for promoting the Heinz name. While visiting New York City in 1896, he saw a sign advertising 21 styles of shoes. He thought of the many different foods he sold. He knew there was more than 60, but for some reason he thought the number 57 sounded right. Instantly, Henry knew he had a new slogan for his company, Heinz 57 Varieties. He later wrote, within a week, the sign of the green pickle with the 57 varieties was appearing in newspapers, on billboards, signboards, and everywhere else I could find a place to stick it. The phrase Heinz 57 was even spelled out in concrete blocks on several hills across the country. Henry, though, didn't want people to merely see his company name and slogan. He wanted them to learn just how special his foods were, and to give people a fun way to sample them. In 1898, he bought a pier in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The city on the Atlantic Ocean drew visitors to its beach and the famous wooden boardwalk built on top of it. Henry's pier jutted out almost 900 feet from the boardwalk into the ocean. At the near end of the pier was a building where tourists could sit and read magazines or newspapers while surrounded by samples of Heinz products. The rooms were also decorated with art. At the far end of the pier sat a larger building with huge windows that looked over the ocean. It had a hall where visitors listened to talks about the Heinz Company and its many operations. Tourists could even place orders for Heinz foods that would be delivered to their homes. During the summer, 15,000 people might visit the Heinz Pier each day. Even people who didn't walk out onto the pier couldn't miss the large electric sign that sat on top of the larger building. It said simply, 57. Tourists who came to Pittsburgh could see the Heinz factory in operation for themselves. Among U.S. industrialists, the men who built large modern factories, Henry was the first to open up his plant to visitors. He wanted people to see how clean and modern the factory was so they would know they were getting the best food possible. Visitors got to taste samples and received a Heinz pickle pin. By 1900, 20,000 visitors took the factory tour each year. That year, Henry continued to show his flair for advertising and his interest in the latest technology. He erected the first electric sign in New York City. More than 1,000 lights flashed an ad for his Atlantic City pier along with his famous 57 varieties slogan. Henry was also the first person to use electric streetcars in the city of Pittsburgh. And like the horse-drawn wagons and railroad cars his company used, they proudly displayed the Heinz name. At the dawn of the 20th century, the HJ Heinz Company was the largest food processing company in the United States. It sold more than 200 products, and people across the country knew and trusted the Heinz brand name. Henry owned a glass plant in Sharpsburg that manufactured bottles and a Pittsburgh plant that made the company's own boxes, barrels, and cans. More than 20,000 people helped harvest crops, and another 2,800 people worked for the company year-round. Henry could not have imagined creating a company this size when he was first making horseradish in the family basement, but now he was the head of a food empire. On Sunday, December 7, 1941.